Welcome artists to Monet Cafe Studio and this lesson where I'm going to teach you how to make a homemade surface for pastel painting in a way I've done before but with a little twist. I'm going to use an affordable surface and I'm going to make a concoction that I often like to make to create a gorgeous glowing underpainting, but this time I'm giving it a lot of texture. I'll begin with a simple sketch painting these dazzling Christmas ornaments. I'll then take you through the stages of blocking in color. This is a great way to begin a pastel painting, ensuring your results are painterly and impressionistic. I'll share with you some of my blending techniques that will ensure your focal point elements get center stage. So welcome into the studio, and I'm excited to share this lesson with you. I love offering alternative ways to make your own soft pastel painting surfaces because soft pastel professional papers can get so expensive. This is Strathmore printmaking paper. It's nice and thick and it makes a great sturdy backing for creating this surface. And the method I'm sharing in this video is just one of many. I like to point out that I have one lesson called 8 Ways to Make Your Own Pastel Paper. I'll have a link to that in the description of this video. The products I'm using to turn this printmaking paper into pastel paper are golden fine pumice gel and golden fluid acrylics. Now this golden fine pumice gel has texture to it. It's kind of a gray color, but it's fairly clear. And this is one of my favorite colors, and I'll be talking about it in just a minute. But first, let me show you, this is the mixture combined. It's the golden fine pumice gel with the golden fluid acrylic, that pretty golden orangey color. Now I had already mixed this up from a previous painting, and I just saved the extra in one of these glass jars. But I want to mention another product you could use instead of the golden fine pumice gel. This is clear gesso, not regular white gesso, but clear gesso. And it also has a little bit of texture to it. By the way, that's what makes the golden pumice gel hold the pastel. So this clear gesso also works great to add the texture that's needed often to get the layering of soft pastels. Here's a piece of watercolor paper that I actually used with the clear gesso. And what I do is I first apply my color to either the printmaking paper that I used here or watercolor paper. And then after the color has dried, I apply clear gesso on top. Now I turned the volume up on this, pardon the music I have in the background, but you can hear the texture of this clear gesso. And I just wanted to share that method first because some of you may not have golden pumice gel and you might have watercolor paper and clear gesso. For this painting, I wanted to add a little texture, so I'm applying my concoction with a textured brush. Now, this is a really old brush, so old you can't even read what it says on there. I think I got a lot of these on Amazon one time. And typically, I use a sponge, though, to get a smooth application, so this is going to be a little different for me. And here we go. Like I had in my little caption, this is 3 parts of pumice gel to 1 part of color, and you could use any color that you want. You don't even have to use a golden color. And the reason I say that is because that particular color I shared, the golden fluid acrylic, that quinacridone color, is discontinued. As you can see, I use diagonal strokes to create a lot of movement and texture. And by the way, if it curls a little like you see here, typically by the time it dries, it flattens out. Now, I know by the time I post this video, we're past Christmas time, but we still haven't made it to New Year's. And I kind of ran out of time to share these tutorials that I had painted before Christmas. And this is an album from unsplash.com where I had saved a lot of gorgeous Christmas-themed photos. And this is the one I chose. I'll have a link to this reference image in the description of this video. Now, I'm going to get a sketch in with just a little pastel pencil. I always say use what you have, but I would suggest not using something too dark to get the sketch in. Now, in the reference image, it was an ornament. I loved the color. That's what really drew me to this. And I loved kind of that soft background. But in the reference image, the ornament was right in the middle, and that didn't feel like a strong composition to me. So you can see I moved the main ornament over, and I'm just kind of using my artistic license to place things where I think they will be pleasing from a focal point perspective. And you don't need a lot to get started. Usually less is more in a sketching situation like this. It's just a great little roadmap to get started when you go to block in your color. So keep it simple. And now the pastel set, you can kind of see to the left there as I'm sketching, is a set that I love, and it's made by a company called Sennelier, and it's their Paris collection. It's 120 half sticks. I always recommend half sticks for beginner artists because you get double the color for your money. And I mention often I have an Amazon shop, and there are a lot of products in my Amazon shop. I have videos, I have recommendations for beginner artists, and this is my Sennelier photo that I have here where I kind of break down some of the colors. And I just found that it's on Amazon right now for a little less than it normally is. I don't know if by the making of this video it will still be that price, but it has been typically about $175. So check out my Amazon shop if you like. It's really just a great resource for beginner pastel artists. I even have videos, product review videos, so you can kind of check out what I think of different pastel painting products. All right, let's get to painting. By the way, I used just a few other soft pastels that I'll kind of talk about that weren't in the Sennelier set. So this is a lovely green from the Sennelier set, and I want to first establish some of my middle value greens. I don't want to go for my darkest elements right away. I'm kind of focusing on things that are middle value. And when I say value, that means the degree of lightness or darkness of something. So this is kind of the middle, not too dark and not too light. And like I said, I changed the composition a little bit with my sketch, but what I really wanted to focus on was that one ornament and how that one branch I'm working on right now seems to come from far away and comes right towards the viewer. And that will become more evident as I add more values. So you can see the texture of this paper because of my brush and my strokes that I did. And if you decide to do it with a textural application like I did, just keep in mind it's going to look a little odd for a while. I did have to do some blending to soften that texture a little bit. You'll see me do that soon. So you may, if you want to do a smooth approach, again, use a sponge. I have a video, I uploaded just a few videos before this one, where I break down this whole technique of making your own surface in this way. So this is another green, a little brighter green that I'm using for some of the pine needles, just layering a little bit on top of that darker green. And now I'm going to go ahead and get in some of the value for this main focal point ornament. And this purple that I've chosen here is not part of the Sennelier set. They have a few purples, but they don't have a lot. And the first one I used was a Terry Ludwig purple. They have some gorgeous purples. The second one was a Sennelier purple, I think. And this is a pink from the Sennelier set. Now, I'm blocking in color, literally just getting my surface covered. But I wanted to address this main ornament because I know it's the star of the show. And this is the process of doing a little bit of layering here. You see how I'm just kind of scumbling in color and value, and I'm trying to keep my strokes in the direction of the shape of the ornament. And lo and behold, before you know it, it'll start to feel spherical. It doesn't right now, but give it some time. So now I'm adding a few more blues. And if you're brand new at art or painting, you might be thinking, well, I just would go immediately for all pinks. Isn't this kind of a magenta colored ornament? But if you really analyze it and squint your eyes, first of all, there's a lot of dark at the bottom. Our light source is coming from the upper right-hand side. Thus, I'm using lighter values and colors on that upper right-hand side. And I'm layering colors on top of each other, and they actually start to blend themselves. So keep that in mind. Often we overblend. We get a blending tool or use our finger. And what we do is we end up making our colors very muddied. Whereas if you do this enough, you start to realize that the more colors that you add, the more the pastels start to actually blend themselves, and you don't get that muddied look where all of the colors start to get very neutral. Of course, if you layered over and over and over again, they would eventually lose their vibrancy. Now, even though I wanted to get in some of my basic values and colors for this ornament, I didn't want to get stuck on it. That's what I used to do when I was a beginner pastel artist. And what you can end up doing is first frustrating yourself, and then you can have one element that's just very overworked. So try to move on, and that's what I just did. I saw there was a dark, deep blue ornament kind of way behind that main magenta ornament. It's very dark. So I used some pretty dark blues from the Sennelier set, and then I could see it almost had a little bit of a turquoise, a little bit of a teal color. Barely a little bit of it you could see kind of to the right side of that ornament, kind of tucked away behind the magenta ornament there. And I actually did go back and start working again on this ornament. I felt it just still felt so textural, and I wanted to really start to get the values to where it made this feel spherical. And I loved this pretty little, very neutral purple color. It's actually, I believe it's a Great American Pastel. I have a little set of purples that I keep in its own little box because purples are great for shadows, and your element that you're painting doesn't even have to have a lot of purple in it. Purple just adds a little pizzazz to paintings. I wanted to go ahead and establish the darks underneath this ornament and make sure that my circle was accurate. And now I'm moving on to another little ornament that is kind of far away. You can see it in the reference image. Again, I started with the purple and then I layer the pinks. This one was a lot easier, of course, because it was smaller and further away. And there is a top part to this ornament that I'm just going to add that little kind of shape above it that will eventually have the wire coming out of it. But it also has, I'm not even sure what that was, a little piece of gold on top of it. And stay tuned because I'm going to use a product I've never used before in a pastel painting, at least I don't think I have, to try to capture that little feeling of gold at the top of this ornament. And you can see that the little structure that's going to hold the wire has a little bit of dark in it as well on the upper kind of left-hand side. Now there's that another pretty blue ornament up at the top, and I got down my dark and now that pretty blue color, and then I think I add a little bit of that turquoise color as well. And it was barely any of that showing at the top. I chose to show a little bit more of it in my composition versus what was showing in the reference image. And while I'm blocking things in, I thought I'd share that where I'm painting right now in this video is our little kitchen in our house that we lived in. I'm not living in this house now, but this is still where my Monet Cafe studio is, in a little bedroom. For years, that's where the Monet Cafe studio has been. And this is the little kitchen in that house. And sometimes you just need a change of scenery. And I really enjoyed moving out to my kitchen island. And I share that because many of you don't have a big space to paint in. I've never had a big space to paint in. And we can make it work wherever you are. And some of you may know my husband and I, we're building my new studio at the new property we're living at now. But for now, I'm still painting in this little house, and it's a real blessing. So now I'm using a pretty neutral color from the Sennelier set. I'm blocking in the background. If you look at the reference image, you can see where's the lightest part. It's where I just added previous to this color here. Now, as I move closer to the interior, where these branches are getting a little thicker, there's not as much light. Notice how my colors are getting a little bit darker in value, and I chose to make them cooler in color because a lot of times that happens when things get in the shadows, they get cooler. So it's a neat little trick to just kind of cool off your color temperatures rather than just going grayer and darker. Take it a little bit on a purple side or a little bit blue, and that usually adds some interest. And I'm making little scratchy, scumbly marks just to keep things directional and give it some energy and movement. But as I mentioned before, you're going to see me do a little blending. Although I wanted texture, I felt like, this is too much texture. And I also wanted to make things feel far away. Remember how I mentioned this reference image? One thing I liked about it was that type of photo where things are blurry in the distance. You can do that automatically with iPhones and everything with certain settings now, but you used to have to do it with a 35 millimeter camera by changing the aperture and create that look where one element is close and the other elements feel blurred out, fuzzy, and further away. So when I go to blending, you're going to see that kind of happen magically right before your eyes. Now you can see I'm using this pretty little kind of neutral blue color from the Sennelier set. It's the same one I used to get the darks on some of those ornaments, and I'm using it to get the darks on the branches of the pine needles and the branches that are reaching out. And now I'm using kind of this pretty neutral green. And what I do when I paint, rather than thinking about the elements, the thing that I'm painting, I typically just kind of squint my eyes and look more at the shape and the value and color. Often we overcomplicate things when we're trying to paint, when we're first starting out. I know I did. I wanted to get every element that was in the reference image and get it very detailed. And the more you paint, the more you realize you really only need to have a few elements that are your main focal interest. And a lot of the other elements are supporting characters. They don't need as much detail. They don't need as much color, saturation, and they don't need as much contrast. So those are things that you learn the more you paint. So you can see now I'm still got a lot of texture going on here. You can see how the surface is still, the textural surface is still showing through with my mark making, even though I kind of like it. I mean, I do. Sometimes I love paintings where texture is showing through. But because I wanted that soft background, that's where I'm going to do my little blending trick very soon. Oh, here it is right now. This is a piece of chamois cloth. You may have seen me use this in other video lessons, and it works really great on this homemade surface. And what I'm doing, now this piece was a little dirty, but it had some areas that were still kind of clean. I'm using a little corner. When I say chamois cloth, it's the kind you dry your cars with. I have the cloth kind. Someone asked me that question one time. Is this the kind that's like leather? But no, it's a piece of cloth, and I got mine at the Dollar Tree for, I don't know, really cheap for a huge piece of it. And I just cut little squares off and I turn them to get a clean corner when I'm moving from one color to another. You can see me turning it as I work, trying not to contaminate my colors. And I sped this up purposely so you can kind of see it coming to life and see how I'm purposely blurring out backgrounds. And I'm also, you see how it's really covering a lot of that golden underpainting. And yet still the influence of the golden color shows through. And I have multiple videos of why I often begin with a golden color. So if you've followed me for a while, you've probably heard me talk about that. But you can always use any underpainting color. And yes, sometimes I do use my finger just to do a little soft blending. And now, doesn't it have that soft effect just from a little bit of blending? And notice I didn't overblend my main focal point elements. And now is where I'm going to go in and kind of fine tune things and use my artistic license to guide the viewer to the elements that I feel should be the central focus and create a more painterly and harmonious composition. And one thing that will really make your focal elements stand out more than the other elements is contrast. And one thing is value contrast. Notice I got a dark brown. I noticed in this one pine branch that's reaching towards the viewer that I mentioned early on, I noticed that it's pretty dark in value. I even got a darker, this is a kind of a really dark purple. It might be the Terry Ludwig eggplant color I talk about often. It's really beautiful dark purple. Can you see how teeny that piece was? I've obviously used it a lot. And I use a little broken line rather than a hard, solid line for these branches. And now I'm coming in with some of these greens. Some of them are some of the original greens that I used to create a few of the pine needles. And this is the point finally where I'm starting to add a little bit of detail. I knew early on that I was blocking in my colors and values, and then I was going to soften some things. And this is when it really starts to get fun, where I'm like, all right, I've got everything in place, and now I can just focus on the things that I really want to bring some interest to. This little green that I have, and a few of the greens I've used, is from the Unison 30 half stick set. You see that little row of greens in the middle? It's some nice neutral greens. This one's not. This is one of the Sennelier greens. And by the way, that Sennelier set, the 120 half sticks, it's one of the best values for the amount of pastels you get for that quality of pastels, but a lot of the colors are very vibrant. It has some neutrals, but that Unison set, this pastel I have here is from the Unison set, had just really some nice, pretty little neutrals. This is a little neutral blue, kind of a gray blue from the Unison set. So that's another great little set for beginners. But again, if you're brand new, check out my Amazon shop. I have some very affordable sets that I recommend. But if you start to get a little more serious, the Sennelier set and the Unison set are really good ones to get. Now, I'm still working on shaping my ornament, and sometimes you shape things so much you kind of get it off, and then the more you fiddle with it, the worse it gets. So I had to play around with it a little bit. Now, this may seem strange, but I felt a golden glow, not just from my background, but in the reference image, I could kind of feel there was a little bit of a gold color. It probably was coming from some of the little twinkling lights. Now, that color I added, it was a little too yellow, or a little too lemony yellow, and I knew it right away, so I tried to fix it there, and I made the highlight too wide on my ornament, so now this is me just fixing things with that little lavender. And that's the great thing about pastel painting. You really do have flexibility to kind of correct things as you go, and it's not as difficult as you think to correct things. You can even erase things to a degree. And now I'm going to focus a little bit more on some of the darker values that are in some of those pine needles behind this ornament. It gave it a nice contrast next to that lighter side of the magenta ornament. And I'm keeping my pressure very light in the areas that are further away. And the further away things get, in your mind, imagine how far something is away from you, the lighter they get in value. So don't ever press very hard when you're working on something that's really in the distance. And pressure really can give you different values. If you take a dark pastel and press it really hard, it's going to be really dark. If you go really lightly, it's not going to be quite as dark. Now, here's that product I was telling you about. It's called Brilliant Gold Ink Mica, and I had used it in a watercolor painting tutorial, and I really liked it, but I had never tried it on a pastel painting, and I wasn't even sure if it would adhere to pastel. So this is my first time experiment with this. And I just dipped a little bit of it on a tiny brush or a small brush. And again, I was trying to represent that little golden element at the top of this ornament. And lo and behold, it actually did stick to the pastel. I played around with it a little bit. Some areas I didn't want it to be too bright. And I wanted to share with you, though, that you don't need this product. I ended up later just using some golden colored pastels. They work fine, too. But it is fun to play with new products, right? And now I'm just adding a few finishing marks, some needles on the branches that I want to get a little bit more of attention. And also I do a little negative painting. And negative painting is when you're carving, rather than creating the positive shape, you're carving negatively into objects. And so what I'm doing is I'm carving into some of the elements of the needles and giving a little negative space between them to create some of those pine needles. You can see how I'm doing it there, carving into it. And this painting was really fun. It was nice to get in a new location, literally just bringing my little tabletop easel to my kitchen island. And by the way, I have a weight behind it, a big, like a workout weight, like a 20-pound weight behind my tabletop easel to keep it from moving. So you just don't know what goes on behind the scenes when you're trying to videotape yourself. And if you've made it this far into the tutorial and you have not yet subscribed to this channel, I hope you will. And if you would like the extra content I'm often talking about, and just to become part of an amazing, beautiful family of artists, consider becoming a patron of mine on my Patreon page. It is such a wonderful, happy place of artists. There's lots to learn, and the thing that I love is I get to see your work. Oh, and it's only $5 a month. I did some more fine tuning, but I wanted to be careful not to overwork things. And I wanted to show you that for the little wire, it needs to be super delicate. and I got a pastel pencil that was kind of dark, and I had to sharpen it a lot to get it to even show up. But again, you want to keep this just very delicate. And here's where that's my husband walking around. He came over to do something at this house. And that's where I was adding a little bit more gold. Remember how I said you don't even need the gold mica product? And this is where I'm finally making those little twinkling golden lights. And it's the same technique I used in a recent video where I painted a Christmas tree. You get your darker values down first, then finally your lighter values. Here I zoomed in a little bit to try to fine tune this little wire a little bit more. Again, keep it very delicate. And here is the final. It was a lovely time that I had in my little kitchen, getting very excited about 2025 and all of the artistic content I'm going to be bringing you here and also on my Patreon page. Thank you so much for being part of this artistic family, and as always, God bless and happy painting.